My name is Dorothy, and I need to tell you about the day I discovered that the daughter I raised for 18 years was not biologically mine. This is a story about love, identity, medical emergencies, and the complicated truth about what makes someone your child. I was 25 years old when I gave birth to my daughter, Emma, at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. It was August 15th, 1985, one of the hottest days of that summer. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. By the time Emma was born, I was exhausted but overwhelmed with love for this tiny human I had brought into the world. My husband Gerald was there throughout the labor, holding my hand and encouraging me through each contraction. When the nurse finally placed Emma in my arms, wrapped in a pink blanket with a little knit cap on her head, Gerald and I both cried tears of joy. She was perfect, with tiny fingers and toes, and she had my nose and Gerald's chin, or so we thought. We spent 2 days in the hospital before taking Emma home to the nursery we had prepared. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Emma was a fussy baby who didn't sleep much, but Gerald and I took turns walking her around the house at night, singing lullabies and marveling at how our lives had changed. As Emma grew from an infant into a toddler and then a young child, I noticed that she didn't look much like either Gerald or me. She had blonde hair while both Gerald and I had dark brown hair. Her eyes were a striking blue while mine were brown and Gerald's were hazel. But genetics can be funny, I told myself. My grandmother had been blonde, and Gerald's mother had blue eyes. It wasn't impossible. What was harder to explain away was Emma's personality and interests, which seemed so different from both Gerald's and mine. Gerald and I were both quiet, bookish people who preferred staying home to going out. Emma was outgoing, athletic, and social from the earliest age. She loved sports and outdoor activities while we struggled to keep up with her energy, but none of these differences mattered to me. Emma was my daughter, the child I had carried for 9 months and given birth to. I loved her completely and unconditionally. The thought that she might not be biologically mine never seriously crossed my mind. Emma thrived as she grew up. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and was involved in every sport and activity available. Gerald and I supported her interests even when we didn't fully understand them. We attended every soccer game, every swim meet, every school play, cheering her on and photographing every moment. When Emma was 16, she started dating a boy named Lucas from her high school. He seemed like a nice young man, polite and respectful, and Emma was clearly smitten. Gerald and I tried to be supportive, while also setting appropriate boundaries about curfews and supervision. One Saturday evening when Emma was 17, she and Lucas had gone to see a movie with friends. Gerald and I were home watching television when my phone rang at 9:30. It was Lucas, and his voice was panicked. There had been a car accident. Emma was hurt and had been taken to Northwestern Memorial Hospital by ambulance. Gerald and I rushed to the hospital, our hearts pounding with fear. The nurse at the emergency department told us that Emma had been brought in, unconscious after the car she was riding in had been hit by a drunk driver. She had sustained a serious head injury and was in surgery. The next few hours were the longest of my life. Gerald and I sat in the surgical waiting room, holding hands and praying, while doctors worked to save our daughter's life. Finally, a surgeon came out to tell us that Emma had survived the surgery but had lost a significant amount of blood. She would need a blood transfusion. The surgeon asked about our blood types to see if either of us could donate directly. I told him I was type O positive and Gerald was type A positive. The surgeon nodded and said they would test us both to see if we were compatible matches for Emma. A nurse came to draw blood from both Gerald and me. We sat side by side, our arms extended, grateful for the opportunity to help our daughter in this tangible way. The nurse told us the lab would rush the results and let us know within the hour whether we could donate. About 45 minutes later, a doctor I hadn't seen before came into the waiting room and asked to speak with Gerald and me privately. We followed him to a small consultation room, and something about his demeanor made my stomach drop. I assumed he was going to tell us something terrible about Emma's condition. The doctor sat down and looked uncomfortable. He explained that they had tested our blood, and there was a problem. Neither Gerald nor I could donate blood to Emma because neither of us was compatible with her blood type. More significantly, based on our blood types and Emma's blood type, it was genetically impossible for both of us to be Emma's biological parents. I didn't understand what he was saying at first. I told him there must be some mistake with the test results, that Emma was definitely our daughter. But the doctor gently explained that blood type genetics don't lie. Emma was type AB, which could only occur if one parent was type A and the other was type B. Since Gerald was type A and I was type O, we couldn't have produced a child with type AB blood. The implications of what the doctor was saying slowly sank in. Emma was not biologically our daughter. But how was that possible? I had given birth to her. I had been pregnant for 9 months. I had labored for 20 hours. There had been no adoption, no surrogacy, nothing that would explain why the child I gave birth to wasn't genetically mine. Gerald looked as confused and shocked as I felt. We both insisted there had to be an error, that the lab had mixed up the blood samples or made some other mistake. But the doctor said they had double-checked everything. The results were accurate. Medically speaking, Emma could not be both of our biological child. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Nothing made sense. I asked the doctor what we were supposed to do with this information. He said that the immediate priority was getting Emma the blood she needed, which they would do through the hospital's blood bank. But he also said we should contact the hospital where Emma was born and inquire about their procedures in 1985. Emma came through her surgery and the transfusion successfully. Over the next few days, as she recovered in the ICU, Gerald and I had to pretend everything was normal while our entire world had been turned upside down. We couldn't burden Emma with this information while she was healing from her injuries, so we smiled and held her hand and told her how much we loved her, all while wrestling with this devastating secret. Once Emma was stable and moved out of intensive care, Gerald and I began investigating what could have happened. We contacted St. Mary's Hospital where Emma was born and explained the situation. The administrator we spoke with was initially defensive, insisting that their procedures were foolproof and that mistakes didn't happen. But after we provided the blood test results and threatened legal action, the hospital agreed to look into their records from August 1985. What they discovered was shocking. In the chaos of a busy maternity ward during a summer heat wave, there had been a mistake. 2 baby girls had been born within hours of each other, both with similar names. And at some point during their first day of life, their identification bracelets had been switched. The hospital found the records showing that another couple, Kevin and Patricia Morrison, had given birth to a daughter on the same day as Emma at St. Mary's. That child had been given to us, while our biological daughter had gone home with the Morrisons. For 17 years, each family had been raising the other's biological child without knowing it. The hospital administrator was apologetic and concerned about legal liability. But Gerald and I weren't thinking about lawsuits. We were trying to process the fact that Emma, the daughter we had raised and loved for 17 years, was not genetically ours. And somewhere in Chicago, there was a 17-year-old girl who was our biological daughter, being raised by strangers. The hospital provided us with the Morrison family's contact information, though they said they were required to notify the Morrisons about the situation as well. Gerald and I spent several days agonizing over what to do. Should we reach out to this family? Should we tell Emma? How would knowing this information affect her? Especially while she was still recovering from serious injuries. We decided we needed to tell Emma the truth before we did anything else. She deserved to know, even though we were terrified about how she would react. Would she feel betrayed? Would she question our love for her? Would she want to meet her biological parents? One afternoon when Emma was feeling stronger, Gerald and I sat down with her in her hospital room. We told her we had something important to discuss, something we had only recently learned ourselves. Emma looked worried, probably assuming we were about to deliver bad news about her medical condition. I held Emma's hand and told her that during her treatment, we had discovered that she was not biologically related to Gerald and me. I explained about the blood types, about the hospital's investigation, about the switched babies in 1985. I told her that none of this changed how much we loved her, that she would always be our daughter, no matter what any genetic test said. Emma's reaction was not what I expected. She was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then she asked if we had known all along and just never told her. When we assured her that we had been as shocked as she was, that we had no idea until the blood test, she seemed relieved. Then Emma asked the question I had been dreading. Did this mean there was another girl out there who was our biological daughter? And did she have biological parents who might want to meet her? I confirmed that yes, the hospital had identified the other family involved in the switch. Emma wanted to know everything. What were their names? Did they know yet? Did they have other children? Was the girl anything like her? I told Emma what little we knew, which was just names and the fact that they lived in Chicago. The hospital had only recently notified them, and we didn't know how they had reacted. Over the next few days, Emma seemed to withdraw emotionally. She was physically healing well, but psychologically she was struggling with this new information about her identity. She asked me once if I had ever suspected she wasn't mine, and I told her honestly that the thought had never seriously occurred to me. She was my daughter in every way that mattered, and biology didn't change that. But I could see that Emma was dealing with complicated feelings about her identity and belonging. She asked questions about what I had been like when I was pregnant, about her birth, about her first days of life. She seemed to be trying to hold on to the narrative of her origins that she had always believed, even though she now knew it wasn't the complete truth. About a week after we told Emma about the switch, we received a phone call from Patricia Morrison. Her voice was shaky as she introduced herself and said that the hospital had informed her and her husband about what had happened. She said they had been shocked and devastated to learn that their daughter wasn't biologically theirs. Patricia asked if we could meet to discuss the situation. She wanted to see Emma, she said, and she thought Emma might want to meet the girl they had raised, whose name was Sophie. I told her I would discuss it with Emma and get back to her. When I told Emma about Patricia's call, she had a complicated reaction. Part of her was curious about these biological parents and the girl who was genetically her sister, but another part of her was angry that strangers were suddenly claiming some connection to her based solely on DNA. She said she didn't ask for this situation and didn't know if she wanted to meet people who were essentially strangers. Gerald and I didn't push Emma to make a decision. We told her we would support whatever she chose, whether that was meeting the Morrisons or not. We also assured her that regardless of what she decided, nothing would change our relationship with her. She was our daughter, period. Emma was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks. The physical wounds from the accident were healing, but the emotional wounds from learning about the switch were still raw. She returned to school but seemed distracted and withdrawn. Her friends knew she had been in an accident but didn't know about the revelation regarding her parentage. About a month after learning the truth, Emma told us she had decided she wanted to meet Sophie and the Morrisons. She said she needed to see for herself who these people were and try to understand how she fit into this strange situation. She was nervous but determined. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a private room at a restaurant where we could talk without interruption. Gerald and I arrived with Emma, who was visibly anxious. When the Morrisons walked in with Sophie, the air in the room became charged with emotion and tension. Sophie looked nothing like Emma physically. Where Emma was blonde and blue-eyed, Sophie had dark hair and brown eyes. But as I looked at Sophie, I could see traces of myself in her facial features, in the way she moved, in small gestures that seemed eerily familiar. This was the daughter I had given birth to, and I was meeting her for the first time at 17 years old. The meeting was awkward and emotional. Patricia kept staring at Emma with tears in her eyes, clearly seeing her biological daughter for the first time with this knowledge. Kevin Morrison seemed uncomfortable and kept looking between Emma and Sophie as if trying to make sense of the situation. The meeting was awkward and emotional. Patricia kept staring at Emma with tears in her eyes, clearly seeing her biological daughter for the first time with this knowledge. Kevin Morrison seemed uncomfortable and kept looking between Emma and Sophie as if trying to make sense of the situation. Sophie herself seemed overwhelmed and confused. She kept glancing at me and then looking away, as if trying to process that I was technically her biological mother. Emma sat between Gerald and me, holding my hand tightly, clearly needing the reassurance that we were still her parents regardless of what this meeting revealed. We spent 2 hours in that restaurant room, sharing stories about the girls' childhoods, looking at photos, and trying to find connections and similarities. Patricia talked about how Sophie had always been quiet and bookish, preferring to spend time reading rather than playing sports. As she described Sophie's personality, I realized with a shock that Sophie sounded much more like me than Emma ever had. Meanwhile, Kevin mentioned that they had always wondered why. Sophie seemed so different from them in temperament and interests. They were both outgoing, athletic people who loved outdoor activities, and they had sometimes felt frustrated that Sophie didn't share their passions. As he spoke, I could see Emma recognizing herself in this description of the Morrisons. It was as if we were all realizing, simultaneously, that our daughters had ended up with families whose genetics matched their personalities, rather than the families they shared DNA with. Emma's outgoing, athletic nature made sense given the Morrisons' traits. Sophie's quiet, intellectual disposition reflected Gerald's and my characteristics. The cosmic joke of the situation was not lost on any of us. By the end of the meeting, we had agreed to stay in touch and allow the girls to get to know each other if they wanted to. but the tension in the room was palpable. We were all trying to navigate a situation that had no precedent, no guidebook, no clear path forward. Over the following months, Emma and Sophie began spending time together. At first, their meetings were supervised and awkward, with all 4 parents present, but gradually they started meeting on their own, grabbing coffee or going to the movies. They were trying to build some kind of relationship, though neither of them quite knew what that relationship should look like. Emma told me after one of these meetings that she found Sophie nice but hard to relate to. They had almost nothing in common in terms of interests or personality. Emma said it was strange to know they shared DNA but felt like complete strangers. She said she felt more connected to friends she had known for years than to this biological sister. I struggled with my own feelings about Sophie. Every time I saw her, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't fully untangle. There was curiosity about who she was and what her life had been like. There was grief for the relationship we never had during her childhood. There was guilt that I had been raising someone else's daughter while Sophie's biological mother raised mine. But there was also a strange distance, because despite our genetic connection, Sophie and I were essentially strangers. Patricia Morrison, on the other hand, was clearly struggling, with much more intense emotions regarding Emma. She would call periodically, asking if she could spend time with Emma, if they could have lunch or go shopping together. Patricia seemed desperate to build a relationship with her biological daughter, to make up for the 17 years they had lost. Emma found Patricia's attention overwhelming and uncomfortable. She told me that Patricia kept trying too hard, asking personal questions and making assumptions about their connection based purely on biology. Emma said she already had a mother, and that was me, and she didn't need or want another one. I felt terrible for Patricia, even as I was grateful that Emma felt secure in our bond. I could imagine how painful it must be for Patricia to want a relationship with her biological daughter and be rejected. But I also understood Emma's perspective. Patricia was a stranger to her, and genetic connection alone couldn't create the kind of bond that comes from years of shared experiences and daily care. The situation became more complicated when Patricia suggested that we should legally acknowledge the switch and allow the girls to choose which families they wanted to be part of. She seemed to believe that Emma would naturally gravitate toward her biological family once she got to know them better, and that Sophie would want to be with Gerald and me. But that wasn't what happened. Emma made it very clear that she had no interest in changing her legal status or moving between families. She said Gerald and I were her parents, that our home was her home, and that genetics didn't change that fundamental truth. Sophie expressed similar sentiments to the Morrisons, saying they were her family regardless of DNA. Patricia had a difficult time accepting this. She began pushing harder for time with Emma, calling more frequently, showing up at events she knew Emma would be attending. Her behavior started to feel intrusive and made Emma increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, after about 6 months of this escalating situation, Emma asked if she could stop seeing Patricia and the Morrisons altogether. She said the whole thing felt forced and fake, and that trying to build a relationship based solely on biological connection wasn't working for her. She wanted to go back to her normal life, without this constant reminder of the hospital's mistake. Gerald and I supported Emma's decision. We contacted the Morrisons and explained that Emma needed space and time, that we would reach out if and when Emma was ready to resume contact. Patricia was devastated and accused us of turning Emma against her biological family, but we held firm, prioritizing Emma's emotional well-being over Patricia's desires. Sophie, interestingly, seemed relieved by this decision. She told her parents that she had only been spending time with Emma because she felt obligated to, not because she actually enjoyed it or felt connected. The Morrisons accepted this more readily than they had accepted Emma's rejection, perhaps because Sophie was the child they had raised and felt more confident in their bond with her. Life slowly returned to a new normal. Emma graduated from high school and went off to college, where she thrived. She chose a university known for its athletic programs and studied sports medicine. She made friends, joined clubs, and seemed to put the whole switched-at-birth situation behind her. But I couldn't quite let it go. I would sometimes think about Sophie and wonder how she was doing, what she was studying in college, whether she was happy. I had given birth to her, carried her for 9 months, but I didn't know her at all. That reality created a strange hollow feeling that I couldn't quite explain or resolve. Gerald and I also had to process our own complicated feelings about the situation. We had genetic testing done that confirmed what the blood types had suggested. Emma was not biologically related to either of us, while Sophie was our biological daughter. We had raised a child who shared no DNA with us, poured all our love and resources into her, and she had become an amazing person. But we had missed out on raising our biological daughter, and that loss, while abstract, was still real. About 3 years after the initial discovery, when Emma was 20 and in college, she called me one evening, sounding upset. She had been contacted by a woman doing genealogy research who had found Emma through a DNA testing website. This woman claimed to be Patricia Morrison's mother, which would make her Emma's biological grandmother. Emma said the woman had sent her a long message about family history, medical information, and wanting to meet her biological granddaughter. Emma found this intrusive and upsetting, especially since she had made it clear she wasn't interested in pursuing relationships with the Morrison family. I helped Emma craft a polite but firm response explaining her boundaries. We also had to have another difficult conversation with Patricia about respecting Emma's wishes regarding contact and privacy. Patricia apologized but said she couldn't control what her mother did, and that her mother was just excited to have discovered a granddaughter she didn't know existed. This incident made me realize that the ramifications of the hospital's mistake would continue affecting us for years, possibly decades. There would be family members on the Morrison side who would want to know Emma and family members on our side who would never meet Sophie. Medical histories would be confused. Future grandchildren might do DNA tests and discover unexpected genetic connections. The ripples from one clerical error in 1985 would continue spreading indefinitely. When Emma turned 23, she told us that she had been thinking a lot about the switched at birth situation and had come to some conclusions about it. She said that, while she understood intellectually that Patricia and Kevin were her biological parents, she felt no emotional connection to them. She said that family was defined by love, care, and shared experiences, not by genetics. Emma told us that she considered us to be her real parents in every way that mattered. She said that the first time she scraped her knee, it was me who kissed it better. When she learned to ride a bike, it was Gerald who ran alongside her. When she had her heart broken for the first time, it was me she cried to. Those experiences and memories were what made us family, not some random genetic lottery. I cried when Emma told me this, overcome with love and relief. Some part of me had always feared that discovering the truth would make Emma question our relationship or feel less secure in our family, but instead, it seemed to have strengthened her conviction about what family really means. Emma also said something that surprised me. She said she was grateful for the hospital's mistake. If she had been raised by the Morrisons, she would have been a different person. Maybe not better or worse, just different. She said she liked who she had become, and she couldn't imagine her life with different parents, even if those parents were her biological ones. I had never thought about it from that perspective before. The mistake had caused pain and confusion. Yes, but it had also resulted in two families getting the children who somehow matched them in temperament and personality, if not genetics. Emma had become the person she was supposed to be, just not through the genetic path anyone expected. Sophie reached out to us when she was 25 years old. She sent an email saying that she had been thinking about the situation and wondered if we could meet for coffee. She said she wasn't looking to change her family relationships, but she was curious about her biological origins and wanted to know more about us. Gerald and I met Sophie at a cafe in downtown Chicago. She had grown into a poised, articulate young woman who worked as a librarian and was pursuing a graduate degree in literature. As we talked, I could see so much of myself in her mannerisms, her speech patterns, even her sense of humor. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected who I might have been at her age. Sophie told us that she had struggled for years with feelings about the switch. She loved the Morrisons and considered them her real parents, but she had always felt like an outsider in her family because she was so different from them. Learning about the switch had actually brought her relief because it explained why she never quite fit in with their athletic, outgoing lifestyle. She said she didn't want or need us to be parental figures in her life, but she wondered if we might be able to have some kind of friendly relationship. She wanted to know about our interests, our careers, our perspectives on life. She wanted to understand the genetic heritage she came from, even if that heritage hadn't shaped her daily life. Over the next few years, Sophie and I developed a cordial relationship. We would meet for coffee every few months and catch up on our lives. I learned about her career, her relationship with a fellow graduate student, her plans for the future. She learned about my work, my hobbies, my perspective on the world. It wasn't a mother-daughter relationship, but it was something meaningful and valuable in its own right. Emma and Sophie also reconnected during this time, meeting occasionally as adults rather than as teenagers forced together by unusual circumstances. They discovered they could be friendly, acquaintances who appreciated their unusual connection without forcing it to be more than it was. The Morrisons and our family never developed a close relationship. The early tension and Patricia's intensity had created barriers that never fully came down. We would occasionally exchange holiday cards or brief updates about the girls, but we moved in different social circles and never became friends. Now, as I look back on this entire experience from the perspective of age and time, I have complicated feelings about it all. I am grateful that Emma came into my life, that I got to raise such an amazing person, that our bond proved stronger than genetics. But I also mourn the relationship I never had with Sophie during her childhood, even though I recognize that she became who she was meant to be with the Morrisons. I think about the hospital's mistake and how one moment of carelessness affected so many lives so profoundly. I think about how different everyone's lives would have been if those bracelets hadn't been switched. Would Emma have become an athlete if raised by us? Would Sophie have been more outgoing if the Morrisons had raised her? Or were their personalities predetermined in ways that would have manifested regardless of environment? The nature versus nurture debate becomes very real when you've raised a child who shares no genetic connection with you. I saw Emma develop interests and traits that came from nowhere in our family, that must have been coded in her DNA from the Morrisons. But I also saw how Gerald's and my values, our parenting style, and our home environment shaped who Emma became. What I learned from this experience is that family is both simpler and more complicated than we often acknowledge. It's simple in that love, care, and commitment are what truly make someone your child. It's complicated because genetics, biology, and inherited traits do matter and do shape who we become. Emma is now 35 years old, married with 2 children of her own. When her first child was born, she asked me to be in the delivery room with her, and I sobbed through the entire experience. Becoming a grandmother through the daughter I raised but didn't give birth to felt like a completion of something, a validation that our bond transcended biology. Sophie is also married now, with a child on the way. She sent us an announcement when she found out she was pregnant, and I felt a flutter of something in my chest. This would be my biological grandchild, but I wouldn't have the kind of relationship with this baby that I have with Emma's children. It was a reminder that the consequences of that long-ago mistake would continue rippling through generations. I share this story because I want people to understand several things. First, that mistakes happen, and sometimes those mistakes have profound consequences that affect people for their entire lives. Second, that family is defined by so much more than genetics, even though society often treats biological connection as the ultimate bond. And third, the complex situations rarely have simple solutions or clear right answers. If you find yourself in a situation where biology and family don't align in the expected ways, whether through adoption, surrogacy, switched babies, or any other circumstance, know that your love and your commitment are what matter most. The child you raise, the child you love, the child you show up for every single day is your child, regardless of what any genetic test says. But also know that biological connections can matter to people in different ways and at different times in their lives. Emma didn't need or want a relationship with her biological parents, but Sophie did want to understand her biological heritage. Both responses are valid. Both are okay. There's no one right way to handle these complex situations. Looking back, I don't know if I would change anything if I could. Would I want to have known about the switch earlier? Maybe, but maybe not. Would I want to have raised Sophie instead of Emma? No, because then I wouldn't know Emma, and I can't imagine my life without her. Would I want to have had both girls somehow? Perhaps, but that wasn't an option. What I do know is that I am grateful for the family I have, for the daughter who chose to claim me as her mother even after learning I wasn't genetically hers, for the grandchildren I get to love and spoil, for the life we have built together. The foundation of that life may have started with a mistake, but what we built on that foundation is real and true and worth more than any genetic connection could ever be. To anyone dealing with complicated family situations involving biology, identity, and belonging, I offer this perspective. Love is a choice. Family is a commitment. And the strongest bonds are often the ones we choose to nurture regardless of how they began. Emma taught me that, and it's a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life.